I'd like to dedicate this to my grandfather. It's his yurtzeit. I don't know if you can see the picture or not. He was in the Russian army, and the story that I remember as a child was every Friday night before they left, they would say, well, what are you doing this weekend? And one would say, I'm going to go to Paris to see the Eiffel Tower. And they'll all go, ha, 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 ha. Or I'm going to China for this, ha, ha, ha. So one day my grandfather says, I'm going to America. And they all laughed. But he was in his uniform and he started to walk, went up to an officer, asked for directions. I'm not sure where. The guy pointed and my grandfather just kept walking, and he walked out of Russia and out of the Russian army. And his story to me was, if he didn't ask, by asking the officer assumed my grandfather knew where he was going, and nobody stopped him. And that is the story I remember as a child.
Will you hold that picture up again? Because my screen at least had you frozen. Hold it right up to the camera there. I'm going to spotlight you. All right. Okay. Oh, your green screen is kind of obscuring it a bit.
Okay.
But
no, when I can see it, let me just... There, hold on. I'll put it up to my face.
There, yeah, put it in front of your face. There you go. Oh, look at that.
So that was my grandfather, and this is when he got married to my grandmother.
Oh, what a memory. How dapper you look.
Yes. Yes.
Greg.
So anyway, thank you for letting me share.
What a beautiful dedication. Greg.
I would like to dedicate this to my mother. She is turning 94 on Tuesday.
Well, happy birthday to her.
Mazel tov.
Wonderful. Anyone else? Marion.
I'd like to dedicate this to my father. It's a yurtzeit. And he was the sweetest, dearest man you'd ever know. He had a core of steel, but as a family man, he was the best. And I had a brother, now deceased also, who looked like him and acted like him. And I was truly fortunate to have both those men in my life.
Wonderful. This is the gift of bringing people's memories in. Anyone else? Kathy?
This past Wednesday, the 24th, would have been my mother's 98th birthday. So I'd like to dedicate this Torah portion to her. And her name was Esther. So very, yes.
Perfect.
That really is. Anyone else? Okay, well, those are beautiful. Oh, Jim.
Little sad note. Last Sunday morning, we lost our little 7-month-old rescue kitty. We had him for the best 3 months of his life. Unfortunately, he was on the street, and he was found by our vet, and we got him to help our other cat. But he lost a valiant fight to pancreatitis or pancreatic cancer, and it was just the last couple of weeks have just been really, really hard on my roommate and myself. So we're just hoping that it doesn't transfer, but just want to dedicate him to his little memory. He's outside, so.
I'm so sorry, Jim.
It happened.
Yeah. Yes.
So with all of these in our hearts, let us turn to this blessing of Torah. And please join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who makes us holy with your commandments, commanding us to engage with the words of Torah. So the Parsha this week is Tetzaveh. And before I get started, can anyone give me a synopsis of last week, what you kind of covered last week as our intro to this week? Anyone want to tackle that? It doesn't have to be a summary of the whole portion. Just sharing something that you learned last week. Every year, teachers are so confounded why their students didn't remember the stuff from last year. And this is what happens. Anyone want to tackle this? All right. So building of the tabernacle or the free will offering, any of that sound familiar? Did you guys kind of cover that? Yes. All right. So that's the context that we're opening up into Tetzaveh. And I think I am really on the fence about what I said that both Sefaria and of course, and in like classic Rabbi Miriam style and my Kindle, but I think I'm going to start with Sefaria. So if you just go, I'm going to put it in as a link. The reason I'm actually doing Sefaria this morning is simply because, and I will show it to you. So there's the link, but I'm going to screen share, but I'm inviting you, if you feel technically abled, I'm going to share my screen for a moment and then come back and call people. As we read through, if you click on a verse in Sefaria, over here, resources pop up and you can look 196 commentators in the Jewish tradition had something to say on this verse. And so you yourself are empowered to go through and look at them. Now, some of them are in Hebrew, so that doesn't help most of us. And I actually spent a significant amount of time trying to translate in some of these and ended up not 100% confident. So I'm not bringing them to you, which I apologize for. But Rashi is always translated, which is nice. And often some of these others are. If you go back, so commentaries are those who commented on the Torah. Tanakh is where this is interesting. This means this verse is referenced elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. Targum are translations. So there were translations made of the Torah. And here you see them. Most of them, some are into Greek and some are into Aramaic. And that actually tells you, let's see, like Targum Jonathan is often translated now into English. And that kind of tells you how the verse was understood around, basically, these are kind of like around the time of Jesus. Mishnah and Talmud. Mishnah is the first level of Talmud, and Talmud is our rabbinic work. Midrash for the interpretive works by the rabbis. Halakha are the legal works by the rabbis. Kabbalah is mysticism. Philosophy, Hasidut. Musar is the spiritual. So you can just, the spiritual ethics, you can just go down and see. And into reference, like sometimes you get Jastros, that's a dictionary. So I'm going to stop my share for a moment, but I am empowering all of you. Sefaria is a fantastic tool. And I know we have incredibly smart people at this and knowledgeable people in this room. And so it'd be interesting to see what people notice and pull out. Thank you, Kathy and Bruce, for putting pages in. And Mark, did you have a comment or did you want to read?
I have a comment.
Yes.
And you asked what we picked up from the last Torah study.
Yes.
And I try to write down a couple of notes of things that stand out to me about the studies as we go along. And one of the things is that when we talk about Sefaria and words of the sages as they relate to the portion that we're studying, but oftentimes the things that our members of the study say are also very, very, I guess you'd say, sagistic, or the word that you take with sage. And I remember that Steve Sloan brought up the golden ratio in the construction of the ark and compared it to the construction of the Ark of Noah, and made some very, very interesting comments about kind of the symmetry of God and the symmetry of all of these things that we're studying. It relates to some truths, but his statement was, it's called the golden ratio. And I remember how we were talking about the agreement was between God and man, and that it was and I think it was Steve Edwards that talked about offer and acceptance at Mount Sinai / Horeb, because I'm not really sure whether it was Sinai or Horeb. But those are the things that I picked up from the last study, and I thought it was a very good study.
Fantastic. And I think that thank you for sharing that, Mark. And Steve Sloan, that insight about the golden ratio, which I remember you making was it only last year that I was one of my first Torah studies, not my first, but one of my first with this group in person. And I remember you sharing that. And that idea that in these details in particular, are holy insights and holy intent, I want us to bring into this morning. So can I have some volunteers to read? All right, I see Linda. Is that Linda Miller? Yeah, so Linda, Mark, Rob, Sandra, did you want to read this morning? Mark, Rob, let's take one more. Marion. Oh, and Barbara. Okay, so I'm gonna put that in the chat. We're gonna go in that order. Fantastic. So now we're gonna go, that's just so I can find it again. I'm gonna share my screen through Safaria, and just do your best with some of this old language. Feel free to change the name of God if you so desire. So our first reader, please. Who did I say? Having just Linda. Oh, can you unmute yourself, or do I need to mute? Let me stop sharing and unmute you first. Linda. All right, let me unmute you. There we go.
Perfect.
Right.
Now you need to reshare it.
Now I need to reshare. Yes.
Sorry.
All right. Here we are.
All right. You shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting for kindling lamps regularly. Aaron and his sons shall set them up in the tent of meeting outside the curtain which is over the ark of the pact, to burn from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be dew from the Israelites for all time throughout the ages.
Fantastic. So
is that the light that hangs over the ark that never turns out in our synagogue?
So let's see, for kindling the lamps. So we know, because it says elsewhere, that we had actually two, right? So what were the two lamps that are named elsewhere? Anyone want to guess? So Linda just named one, the Ner Tamid, right? The Ner Tamid, the eternal light. Greg? Or do you have your hand up for something else?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer your question here, because I was struck almost immediately by, they're out in the desert. They don't have olive trees. How do they get the olive oil? And as they're traveling, are there always is there olive oil available?
It's a story. It's a story.
Linda, hold on, let him finish. Sorry.
Yes, Linda, it's a story.
We're already rowdy today.
Supplied like the manna. I don't know.
Okay, so here we have this commandment to bring the oil, the beaten oil of olives regularly, to provide, and in fact, the finest oil to provide light in the tabernacle. Fantastic, that's lovely. But you're raising this great point, which is they're wandering in the desert. There are plenty of acacia trees presumably around, but not olive trees. So where for 40 years are they going to find all of this oil?
Above my servant.
And Linda's arguing, like, don't let practicality get in the way of a good story. So Bruce, Winters, and then Rob.
So to answer your question, the other one is the menorah.
Fantastic. Yes.
But I think there were olive trees, and there's lots of midrashes about why it's olive oil and how hard it is to get the oil out of olives, and how our struggles were like olive oil. And I think it's a great metaphor. But I do want to add one thing. I actually looked up this little section in a bunch of different Torah books, and the words that are used are very, very different for lighting the candle or lighting the eternal light. In one of them, it says light continuously. In one, it says light regularly, burn perpetually, burn constantly, and then burn from evening to morning. So it's really very interesting, and all those things mean very different things if you spend time thinking about what do those mean. It's not what we think of today, where it's just always on, except when Gersh forgets to turn it on, which we've had a few times. But
So-
we think of it as always lit.
So here we have, so let's dig into some of the language. So here we have Ner Tamid, right? Which is the eternal light, but here is translated La Ha'alot Ner Tamid. So for kindling the lamps regularly. So they translated this Ner not as the particular eternal light, which is for as it has come down in tradition, but that actually maybe this just meant the menorah in this translation, right? Or that it meant a general term, Ner general. So that's super interesting. Might be why we have 196 comments about it in the commentators. And then to continue, right? So now we had this next line. Let's look from the evening until morning before God. This shall be an eternal commandment, Chukat Olam, for all your generations. So that's repetitive actually there. And so we have a lot of of language, as Bruce is pointing out, that is, and then 8 B'nai Yisrael. So we actually have in some ways 3, although Hukat Olam L'Dorotam, the 8 B'nai Yisrael, an eternal commandment for all the generations, for all the ages of Israel. That's Israel Hebrew poetry. So we have that parallelism of Hebrew poetry in there, and multiple versions, ways of saying forever. Keep doing it, not just every day. And not just throughout the day, but throughout all the generations. I'm going to stop the share so we can see our comments. But that's certainly a great example of when the Torah is trying to hit us over the head with something by saying it in multiple ways. Rob.
What strikes me is that, I have to be unmuted.
You're unmuted. I unmuted you. You're good.
The thing that strikes me is that prior to this, many of the commandments were one-time things, one action, bring me this, bring me that. But here we're looking at things that are going to be for time immemorial, forever. So when he says regularly, it means that that's going to be forever. And that's a different type of commandment, because now God is actually telling the Israelites that you need to do these things now and forever, whereas before commandments were single tasks to do. And I think that's one difference I see in evolution.
So I think there were other commandments that were through all the generations, but we've just had a whole bunch about bring me your fine things and make them right now into these things. And this is a reminder that this is an eternal thing. So maybe it's in contrast, like you're doing things right now to create something, and then once it's made, you're done. Although of course, multiple generations remade them and in fact made them differently, which we'll spend significant time on today potentially. But this is saying, no, this is not just a one-time thing. This is not just you do this now and then you get to use it. You have to keep renewing light. So there we are. There's our first opportunity to really dig in. What does that mean? What's the symbolism of needing to continually bring the oil, continually light the lamps? Diane.
To me, this is about the people. There is a divine essence, perhaps, above us, around us, and whatever. But if all of this is not absorbed by the people, then there's no connection and no relationship. The participation in all of these acts of devotion, or whatever you want to call it, is absolutely essential. So to comprehend that which is all around us or above us or within us, it has to arrive within us. So to my mind, this is what this is all about. And if we are to continue as a people, there has to be enough absorption. So it's about that, but it's mostly about us, to my opinion.
So let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. This recurring commitment, this daily commitment, weekly commitment, monthly commitment, generational commitment, and David is giving us keva, which is fixed, requires commitment, and it might also be creating that commitment, creating that absorption of commitment. By doing it, you commit, and then you feel that sense of commitment and that sense of being bought in and part of the covenant. So is that kind of what you were saying, Diane, that the
Yes, what
the
I'm
continual act creates
Yes.
that absorption?
What I'm saying is the absorption, the internalization, the becoming part of this relationship is essentially, to my mind, what it's all about. Otherwise, if there's no connection, nothing is going to happen. And this is a continuity of a people that's being born and the beginning of a desire to have that happen.
Fantastic. We are connecting back to in the chat in particular, we are connecting back to our conversation 2 weeks ago about a save and ishma. We shall do it and then we shall understand. So as David just put in, the keva leads to discovering the kavanah. The doing leads to discovering of the intent. All right, parents, Susan and David Phillips.
You want to say? Just wanted to point out that it was also how God created the world, was separating day from night.
Let there be light.
Ah, so the light is a reminder of creation.
Yes.
Fantastic. Greg Snyder.
Go that we're in partnership with God, and as it's on our sanctuary wall, let us walk in the light of the Lord. We are a partner with God in creating the light of God.
So the light, what do you mean? What do you mean by the light of God in there? What do you think?
Well, I think that can be taken on so many different levels. But on this one level, we are creating a very very low level, if you will. We're creating the light that we keep in front of the ark, in front of the Torah, as a reminder of the light of the Lord, of the goodness of the Lord, of the ineffable. Yeah.
So here's a question. What does the light mean? Because clearly there's metaphorical power here. And I want to go back to your first statement, Greg, that we are creating it with and for God, right? We are creating it with God. So that is powerful. What does that mean? And I don't want to lose Sandra's comment now that I've put that out there, which is that ritual, that is this repetition that creates commitment. Really, a really powerful way of thinking about why we do ritual and how we do ritual, Sandra. So thank you for that. Steve Edwards.
Along the lines of Greg's comment, is just that God created the pillar of fire to lead the children into the wilderness, and in various parts of the Bible, he talks about choose light, choose goodness. So here's this is a retrojection of what the temple in Jerusalem is going to be once we're established in the land. And what we're doing is we're choosing light every day by creating the symbol of God's presence in the world in our holy sanctuary. So it is, as Greg said, emblematic of our partnership with God to create a better world.
So it's a symbol of our partnership with God,
basically. But it's
okay.
And it's a symbol of why that partnership exists.
Great. So I actually put two of those things that you just said, which is light is goodness and righteousness, right? And particularly in Torah, in Tanakh, we see that. And then this idea that light is a symbol of our partnership with God. Kathy. Thank you for that, Steve.
Just a little bit in addition to what Steve said, what I've been thinking about is the fact that not only are the Jewish people God's chosen, they are to be the light to the Gentiles. So this is another way that they are reminded and lets the Gentiles know that they are the light, they are the chosen of God.
So thank you for reminding us of our own Tanakh, which many Jews haven't struggle with that chosenness idea. But this is it at its best of being a moral light, right?
Mhm.
So thank you, Kathy. Other comments. So let's see what we have here in the chat. And the other people, I thought I saw another hand. Did I miss a hand? Barbara Myers keeps me honest. Jim Selkin. Yes, Jim, you're muted.
I was going to say, Steve took the words right out of my mouth, what I was going to say, but what I was going to add was the fact that every act was led by light. Every major comeuppance to this point was preceded by some fantastic light. And this is just a continuation. It's another more physical sense instead of the analogous sense that we've been discussing. And there's many interpretations.
That's pretty powerful.
Thank you.
So we have some different lights piece in here. Torah, aura, the illumination of Torah, or how Torah might illuminate us. And Bruce is reminding us of nefesh, that there's also a metaphor that the soul is a light or is a lamp. And we see that elsewhere in Tanakh. I see Diane's hand.
What I was
okay, sorry.
What I was just going to add was that when Hashem first came to the people in the desert, it was through thunder, lightning, it was illumination. And this illumination extended more than just the physical act of light gaining attention. It extended to how we were going to act and illuminate ourselves and then the world.
So we have, it is revealing that we have this language in English as well as in Hebrew about the metaphor of light, right? That we illuminate means to understand, but it comes from this idea of light. Diane.
I see this, that's all very, interesting what has been said, but in following up what I said before, to me, the light would be the spark of desire, the beginning of desire to connect. Otherwise, nothing would follow. So it's the beginning, and it's a spark, which then culminates in a fire of desire and wanting to know and to associate. And in that relationship, we sense a divine being, perhaps.
So a desire to connect, and I like that you left what to connect. Are we connecting with each other? Are we connecting with God? Are we connecting with knowledge? And it can be all of those things, and all of those can have a metaphor of light.
Well, I think we're connecting with ourselves in a sense. If we look around at the world about us, and we want to have a deeper comprehension, a deeper sense of the lightness of being, or the heaviness of being, however you want to put it, you would have to have that spark of desire to begin with, to develop that relationship.
Yes, and we need light to see each other. Jim, I'm going to share what you just put in the chat privately to me, which is that you're staying on, but you have to turn off the light. So that means we no longer get to see Jim's face because it's night, right? Is it night there? So there is real metaphors about seeing and connecting that have to do with light. Lori or Harley?
Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
I am just thinking about the word light, and I love to read books about what's going on in physics at this time. And one of the things that I find just kind of blows my mind is that the entire universe that we perceive or are able to perceive with our brains and with our technology is 4% of reality. The rest is called either dark matter or dark energy. It's not meant dark as in evil or bad. It's just meant that it's not lit up in a way that we can see it. And I'm just thinking about that in this conversation. And the fact is, going back to Greg's comment that God is the ineffable, actually 95% of the universe is the ineffable, and it is our quest, not only spiritually, but also scientifically, to explore this. And I just think that the fact that the Hebrew Bible uses the word light, and what we know about light now and our perception of reality is so interesting and so ties together. And if anybody's interested, the person that I most love is Frank Wilczek. He writes a column from time to time in the Wall Street Journal, but his books, particularly A Beautiful Question, are outstanding if you want to learn something about the study of the physical world now.
That is fantastic. And I of course, I cannot help seeing the parallels to our own tradition. A beautiful question. So, the rabbis say that our tradition teaches us to question, right? And its answers are important, but the questions are more important because some things, the answers move, the answers change, the answers change every day, the answers change every generation, the answers change with your increased technology or with a different perspective. And so there's a term, machloket l'shem shamayim, a debate for the sake of heaven. And that is, in many ways, is pursuit of understanding the universe. Maimonides taught that the highest, so Maimonides was not a mystic. He was the opposite of the mystics, but he taught that the highest aspiration of the human soul is trying to understand God, understand the universe, and that we can only get a tiny proportion of understanding, which syncs so well with what you just shared, Lori, but that human beings were gifted uniquely to understand more than any other animals on the earth. And that is what it means to be created in the image of God, is to pursue knowledge and understanding. So, and I think that of the religious traditions, there is something unique in that encouragement to pursue intellectual understanding. And it's an incredibly important part of our tradition and my own Jewish identity. All right, Christy.
I just wanted to put Steve Sloan on the spot and ask him if he will share, he's gonna choke on his water. Ask him if he will, sorry, don't turn red. If he will share his, we have a Torah perspective after we have our Torah meeting. If he will share his viewpoint about being created in God's image and the light, because I think that would be very appropriate at this point. That was really good.
Thank you. Thank you for putting me on the spot. Are you willing to be spotted?
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I unmuted you.
I know what Christy's referring to now. And I was actually going to share something entirely different.
Well, please share both.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Being put on two spots.
Sorry.
So several years ago in Torah study with Rabbi Miller, we were talking about, it was Genesis 1, and we were talking about the notion that man is created in God's image. And I had been made to understand that the word that's used in Hebrew that translates in God's image could also be translated in God's shadow. And Rabbi Miller agreed that it could be translated that way. And I liked that translation, that idea so much, because what is a shadow but something that is created when something gets in front of the light? But the shadow itself is a two-dimensional representation of that thing that the light is producing. And so we live in a two-dimensional world related to God. We do not live in God's world. We live in our own world. I heard something else about this recently when they were comparing this notion to the playing pieces on a Monopoly board. And one of the playing pieces they're on the board all the time. The playing pieces are talking to each other. And one of them says, "I don't believe in Parker Brothers." I go around the board all the time. I see Made by Parker Brothers on the board, and I travel all around the board on the Monopoly. Where are them? I don't believe in Parker Brothers until the other piece is able to explain to him that Parker Brothers is the creator. They don't live in the realm of Monopoly.
Wow, what a parallel.
That notion about shadow and light and the difference between the creator and that which is created.
Yeah.
The other point I wanted to make was it's along these lines. In fact, what was just shared a moment ago about dark matter, I also heard the same thing this week, that when God separates light from darkness, that there seems to be a notion in that darkness and light sort of were co-equal, that there was both darkness and light. It was some sort of mixture of the two that we as human beings can't quite understand, and God divided the two and created light for our world in our physical reality. And that it's hard to explain this. When there are three realms in the Mishkan, the most holy of which is the Holy of Holies, and when you only meant for the priests, where when you approach, what does the priest wear? The priest wears all white. We're now in God's realm. In fact, the entire creation of the Mishkan, as I was talking about last week, is to create a place for God in our world. Just like God, it's sort of a payback for God creating a place for us in his world by creating the universe and the major divisions that he makes when he creates light and when he separates the waters to create a space for mankind to occupy. And then he creates the luminaries in the sky, which is not for light, but for time, to mark time. So God creates light and space and time in those three major divisions. And when we enter the Mishkan, we're actually undoing those three divisions. We go backwards through those separations in order to approach God's world, which occurs at the Holy of Holies, where only the priest can occupy, wearing white. And apparently there's some rabbinic talk about the words of Torah, the original words of Torah, having been written in black fire on the fire of white parchment. And I think that aptly goes back to this notion of God's space that only God occupies, which is this mixture of black and white, which equates to this physical reality that we now know something about, which is this dark energy and light. God's location, God's place.
The rabbis also have two ideas of light. They have this idea of like practical light, the light we get from the sun, and this divine light, the light of the world to come. And you can also see parallels in that. And they get that but from the story of creation, where God creates light twice. The first creation is the separation of light from darkness. And then the second creation is of the sun, moon, and stars. And so the rabbis ask, why twice? And so their answer is these different forms of light. I am not a physicist, but I've always enjoyed the parallel of the idea of separating light from darkness and the idea of the Big Bang and how all of the matter and energy kind of exploded out and they were compressed to be one and then divided. And I've always found that to be a powerful parallel, even though there's a good chance that I'm misunderstanding. So Steve, thank you for sharing. Did you share all that you wanted to share, or was there another thought?
There's another thought, but I don't want to hog the light here, so I'll come back.
But I'm bummed. Okay, fantastic. So any other thoughts or comments on light, or do we want to? Yes, Ellen, thank you for giving us the language of the Kabbalists about that original light, which is that or Ein Sof. And Ein Sof is that most abstract idea of God, and it is specifically connected to light. So Ein Sof means without end. And it's this idea of that which is truly infinite and incompatible with the finite. So there's all sorts of stuff we can go into there, but I am not actually intending to take us down a fully Kabbalistic trail as we have done in the past. But it's impossible not to experience that. So going back up, and now you know why I put the line in the chat. Our next reader is Mark Ike. Mark, wave so I can, so Matthew, I can unmute you. Fantastic. Matthew got to you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And we have moved ahead an entire 2 verses, but a new chapter. So we are on verse 1. Will you please read for us?
Okay. Make.
No, here, sorry. There we go.
You shall bring forward your brother Aaron with his sons from among the Israelites to serve me as priests. Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron.
Fantastic. We're actually going to stop there. So any thoughts, insights, comments, questions about this verse? No? Oh, Marion.
It looks like the continuation is the continuation through generations, not just Aaron, but also his sons, not just to be priests, but perhaps to bring light to the people who need a little, a little direction. And the light, of course, is what you go toward. You don't go away from light, you go toward light.
Fantastic. So there's this reassurance that there's a generational continuity happening already. Steve and then Muriel.
A couple things. One is that he says these people are Aaron's sons twice, so that there must be purpose for that. And it also strikes me that Nadab and Abihu are mentioned, and of course we know where they're headed. And I wonder if there's a connection between mentioning Nadab and Abihu and saying the names of his sons twice, but I can't quite, it's kind of technically at the edge of my mind, but I can't quite put it together.
Great. Any thoughts about that? And somebody, I'm wondering if anyone's commentaries have that. Muriel. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm building on what Steve just said. That's what I certainly look at that and I know, I know what's coming.
Yeah.
And those of us who've read this more than once know that serious problems are going to happen for these 2 sons, the first 2 sons. And foreshadowing, shall we say, or it makes you want to read on and wait to see, oh boy, the strange fire is coming. And
we have another form of fire and light that we know that is coming.
The strange fire is related to light, but it's not such good light, it's negative light, and that's something that we have to weigh in on.
So fantastic. And the Kabbalists connect them. The strange fire, right, that destroyed Nadab and Abihu and Korah. It's all kind of confusing, right? We recall, some of us recall back to those studies of these rebels, and some Kabbalistic interpretations is that they literally got too close to the infinite and were consumed by the dangerous fire, right? By that human beings are not meant to get that close to that in fact God is destructive. God's holiness is dangerous. And that is actually why they create multiple fences metaphorically around the Holy of Holies. And that is actually there's a lot of consensus on the understanding. I think it was Carol Myers who really made that argument that God's power, it was seen as dangerous, and that is one of the reasons in a different way for ritual. So Sandra said ritual gives us this continual commitment, right? That we bring the light every day and every week, and it's a continual practice. But it also creates it's like gloves on mitts that you use to handle the holy, right? It creates safety tools for approaching and interacting with the holy, which is in fact incredibly dangerous. So, and here we have light and fire as the metaphors for that danger. If you play with fire, you can get burned. Exactly. So as Jim and David are commenting. So Jim asked me directly, is this the first mention of Nadav and Avihu? They've been mentioned in Sensai, but this is the first time we really have them called out as serving as priests, I believe, although I could be wrong. I'm not a Torah scholar that knows Torah backwards and forwards. But we have here, this is also which is not so evident to the rabbis, but Ibn Ezra calls this out. This is actually a polemic because up until this point, Ibn Ezra says Moses has been acting as priest. And this is the moment when God says someone else is going to be priest. Your brother is priest. We have priest and prophet. We're now separating these two roles, which is an inheritance of the Israelite people, that we end up having priest, prophet, and king, three different roles of power and relationship to God and the people. And this is the beginning of that establishment. And in addition, a lot of documentary hypothesis, current scholarship currently rests on this idea that in fact, not all priests in ancient Israel were part of the Aaronide, the Aaron clan. They were not all descended from Aaron. That in fact, many of them were descended from Moses. And sometimes any Levite could be priest, and that these were polemics, and you can actually trace which part of the Israelite people, Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom, internal politics, pre-establishment of the monarchy, all of these things are polemical, but we don't know that anymore because we have Exodus that tells us that Aaron and his sons and only them can be priests. So just a reminder that there are internal polemics that we don't always see now, but that were very real at the time that these were written. So Mark, you only got to read one verse. I'm going to let you continue. I'm going to share my screen. Go ahead.
Okay.
Verse 2. Yes.
Make sacral vestments for your brother Aaron, for dignity and adornment.
All right, and that congratulations. Keep going. You can do one more.
Okay, thanks.
We're gonna stop after the next one.
Next, you shall instruct all who are skillful, whom I have endowed with the gift of skill, to make Aaron's vestments, for consecrating him to serve me as priest.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask, does anyone have other translations in front of them who can tell us how verse 3 is translated? So can anyone have a different translation of 3? Oh, Mark does. Go ahead, Mark, and then Bruce.
Okay. I'm going to start with 2. This is from Stone.
Okay.
You shall make vestments of sanctity for Aaron your brother, for glory and splendor.
And here's dignity and adornment. Great. Continue.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you shall speak to all the wise-hearted people, whom I have invested with the spirit of wisdom, and they shall make the vestments of Aaron to sanctify him, to minister to me.
Okay. Very different translations, right? We have skillful versus wise, and to serving me versus consecrating me to me. Excellent. Bruce, do you have yet another, Matthew, will you please unmute him? Do you have yet another version?
I do, but this is quick. I have Hertz, and it says exactly what Mark just said.
Okay, right. Okay, so these, oh, Kathy. And who are you reading from?
In the Jewish Study Bible, verse 3 says, next you shall instruct all who are skillful, whom I have endowed with the gift of skill.
So that is the same translation as we have in Sepharia. So that tells us actually that it's JPS translation, because that's what the Jewish Studies Bible is. Jean, is this a comment or a translation?
No, this is another reading from Alter. And you shall speak to every wise-hearted person whom I have filled with spirit of wisdom.
Ooh, who I filled with the spirit of wisdom. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. That they make Aaron's garments to consecrate him to be priest to me.
To consecrate him to be priests to me. So consecrate him to be priest to me.
Priest to me.
Consecrate him to serve me as priest. So whether there's a verb or there or not, that's a great question. Any other translations, I'm intentionally leaving this up for comparison. Muriel.
Well, it's not another translation because I'm looking at JPS as well, but I think it's very interesting, the difference between skill and wise. I always think that somebody who is skilled is just a clever seamstress, a clever somebody who knows how to fix something. He's got or a woodworker, somebody really knows how to do this beautifully. Whereas wise, I think of a philosopher. I think of somebody who takes words and finds meanings. And they're both very necessary attributes.
And this is in many ways reconnecting them. I'm going to read you Everett Fox, because I have Everett Fox who does a very literal tries to be as close to Torah as possible. So Everett Fox translates this as, so you speak to each who is wise of mind. So here we have that kind of conflation there, whom I have filled with the spirit of practical wisdom, and they may make Aharon's garments to hallow him, to be priest for me. So, and he hyphenates be priest as a state of being. So, all right. So I want you guys to be able to see the chat, because we've got a lot going on in chat, which are worth sharing. Barbara, are you willing to share your comments?
Me? Yeah. There's a phrase that we use saying that we all have our own unique ability. And that is what you want to really strive to do and stuff. But this is like the first time I've heard it in the Torah, or maybe the beginning, that God gave certain people certain skills and certain wisdom, but we all have our own unique ability.
Fantastic. All right. Greg and then Steve Edwards.
I just want to note that first we have an instruction to Moses to make the sacral vestments, followed by have other people make it. I just want to think that there's something in the whole process of editing Torah, that there's two different strains that have been sort of smashed together here.
Yeah, there is something that is an interesting contrast, because moments ago, which in Torah, as we received it chapter wise, the two have been separated. So you can make the argument that the you here is the Israelites, but when they're condensed together like this, right, where we have the last two verses of 27, and it's really clear that God is meaning you Moses. And then we have this commandment, you shall make garments for your brother. And yet we know that it's the artisans who are making it. So it's very, very interesting. Steve.
This passage is, to me, reminiscent of when God is talking about the plagues, and he's showing off. He's saying, I want everybody to see how much power I have. It's not enough that I just get you out there. Everybody has to acknowledge how powerful I am. So here, he's consecrating Aaron and his sons as priests to serve him, and making everything so splendid so that these people are worthy to serve him. And I know that's a very human thing, but it's also not. It's not an attractive part of our tradition, I think.
Interesting. That is an interesting parallel that you are seeing, kind of almost the would it be maybe like a pride element here that is
kind of an adolescent pride.
Interesting. So we're gonna go Rob, then Jean, and then Lori.
So Moses, in a way, is actually making it, because he's delegating, and now as a leader, he's delegating responsibility. But obviously he's still responsible as well. So it's not necessarily taking something away from him, but if he bypassed Moses, it would be kind of a little bit of a slap in Moses' face, who's led them so far. So maybe God realizes that Moses needs to maintain his station, he needs to not be the only one to make these investments, but in some way, maybe he's responsible in some way, even indirectly, for delegating responsibility. And so everything comes together.
So there is a transfer that's an important symbolic transfer of power of Moses's priesthood to Aaron that is enabled by Moses being the one to symbolically give these garments, even though it was the people who made it. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Jean.
It's from Alter, and it says, to be priest to me. Everywhere except perhaps in this chapter, the verb kichin is intransitive and means to perform the functions of a priest, Kohen. Here, however, the infinitive has an accusative suffix, and so might make to make him a priest. In any case, the transformation of Moses's brothers and nephews into a distinctive sacerdotal caste is the burden of the passage. That it's more than just performing the priestly functions. It's actually that this is the caste that does it, that this is a different passage, which I thought was sort of interesting.
So is it saying, do you interpret that as meaning it is this moment where they become priests, or it is a different kind? Yeah.
No, yeah. Well, it is that he uses a different verb. There's a different comment, and one is most of the time he's talking about these are the functions of the priest, but this one passage actually sets them up as the caste to be a priest, and then he goes on to talk about the priestly garments as being, these wonderful and beautiful things.
So there's something really powerful in the garments as well, and
Right.
there's this idea of like, what does it mean to be a priest? There's all of these practical things you're doing, you're making, you're doing your sacrifice, you're
Right.
cooking, basically, right? A lot of cooking is involved in being a priest, but it's about serving God. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Jean. What was that?
And I said, and a lot of blood.
And a lot of blood. Yes. So it can be a very gory job. But they're in these gorgeous garments. Lori.
I'm just thinking about the birth order here. And once again, we have the older son serving the younger son. And, with everything that Moses has done, really, I don't get the nice robes. I have to give it to my kid brother. And, that is just a very interesting concept to me. And then if you think about what happens to the sons, Nadav and Abihu get blown up. And that's how we remember them, the sons of Aaron. The sons of Moses, we remember every Friday when we say the blessing over the children to remember Manasseh and
sons of Joseph.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
Very poignant that we have that almost direct connection to Moses, to our kids every Shabbat. I just think it's very profound. Judaism has always grappled with the role of the priest. We're still grappling with it today. Can women, not women, who's a priest, who's not a priest, converts, we're still grappling with it, and it starts right here. I think it's so interesting.
So excellent. I do want to make one correction, which is Moses was the younger.
Oh, he was? Yeah,
yes.
I was thinking of excuse me for that. I was thinking of, the scene of the river and the son being born. I didn't know if Aaron had already, well then that should have been Aaron's story, really, right?
So here, that's actually an excellent example. It is, once again, Moses is the youngest and he is the hero, right? And Aaron actually does serve him. Aaron reports to Moses. So yes, Moses is delegating authority, and there's this real power, which you also see later in Leviticus in the ordination of Moses serving his brother, and Moses being the prophet with direct connection to God, who is acting as valet to Aaron. So there's real power in that, like switching of power roles, and it already exists in that Moses is the younger. All right, I think we have Kathy, Diane, and Steve.
Off again. All
right. I didn't notice this one, but both in verse 20 of the previous chapter and in verse 1 of this chapter, it starts out with "now you." And in the commentary in Stone, it says Regarding the commands up to now to build the various parts of the tabernacle, Moses had been instructed to convey the instructions to those who would do the work, but he had no personal involvement in the labor. In the first three commands of this Sidra, however, Moses is told, now you, implying that he was to involve himself personally with these tasks.
Right, right. So this is going back to the point that Moses is now involved. It was but yet it calls out that you are supposed to use artisans, but Moses is going to be involved. Is Moses weaving? Unclear, but Moses is definitely having a role. Okay, go ahead, Diane.
Well, it seems to me that there are different levels of being, different levels of connecting. Aaron, who's supposed to be a person of the people, okay, must become elevated to a higher plateau in developing a relationship with the Almighty. And so we have a progression of absorptions here, it seems to me, and a different level that has to be arrived at. And you can imagine different ways that could happen. I don't think it's so clear how this could happen, but there has to be a development of that theme. So that's how I'm perceiving it. There were so many unknowns here, but in order to arrive at a higher plateau, come closer to the divinity, one has to grapple with that which might or might not be. And so this is a desire to achieve that end, perhaps.
So what is the desire?
What's that?
What is the desire? Where is this is a desire?
Well, here you have a simple man. We're talking about the relationship between a divine essence. How does one arrive from being an ordinary man to that level of idealism that would exemplify that which might be a divine being? Now, this is very involved. I don't know.
Right. I'm going to cut you off, but I think that's fantastic question. As we look at the garment descriptions, which I don't know if we're even going to get into, but they go on and on about the garments and to ask I'm not sure if you meant Moses or Aaron, but if we look at the priests and how these garments are articulated in detail for the high priest. And I think it is a relevant question. How do you take a simple man and have him be the representative of the divine for the people and the representative of the people for the divine? And these vestments certainly have a role. Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, me?
Yes, sorry.
So several things. One is this notion of the skillful and the wisdom. This reminds me a little bit of what used to happen for many centuries during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. There was the idea of the master builder. And when the biggest construction projects of those periods were the making of churches all through Europe. And you used to have, similar to this, the entire people would make offerings of money or of materials towards the building of this very important building for in their lives. But there was one person in particular that had both the skill and the wisdom to manage the overall construction. And I think so there is a sort of a connection between skill and wisdom in that regard. So all of this stuff, not just the vestments, but we're reading through this whole construction of the Mishkan, and what strikes me is the detail which is given for all of it. And we talked last week about how you actually can construct the ark from the information that's given, and that's true of all of these things. They're often given specific dimensions in 3 dimensions in our physical world: width, length, and height. They mention materials, usually precious ones of various different sorts, but they're very specific. And when God creates the universe, he creates the universe also with very exquisite detail. Back to Lori, if you look at the small distinctions between the 4 major forces of the universe, they're tuned to extremely high detail. And God is giving us very detailed instructions here with which to make all of these things. And I think that it also points up this, this notion of us being in the image of God. One of the ways we are in the image of God is that we also are makers. We aren't creators in the sense that God is. He creates ex nihilo. But we create using the stuff of the physical world, which is all that we have around us, for which to create. And God gives us explicit instructions as to how to do that. The last thing I wanted to talk about is this whole thing. To me, this is something I picked up this week, that the whole making of the Mishkan is actually a recreation of the experience at Sinai. It is a portable Sinai. And how does that come forward? Well, we just read a couple of Parsha ago how the people were allowed to approach the mountain, but not too close. This is also true in the Mishkan. All of the people can enter the courtyard, but not the Mishkan. Who can enter the Mishkan? The priests. Back at Sinai, the priests are allowed to come closer to the mountain than the people, but not to enter the Holy of Holies. Who can enter the Holy of Holies? Only Moses and Aaron. Who enters the Holy of Holies on Sinai? Moses and Aaron. We also have the cloud. The cloud descends on Sinai and the cloud descends on the Mishkan. We are able to literally carry the Mishkan around with all of these things to remind us of the experience at Sinai. And I just thought that was a fascinating notion that all of these things are symbolic and representational so that the people will remember the experience at Sinai, especially after 40 years of wandering in the desert.
Yes, and we have not lost it. The rabbis built it in to our Torah service, and it's literally built in to our sanctuaries with a bima, a raised area for reading Torah. Thank you, Steve. Lori. And then I want to, Carrie, are you exercising or do you have a comment? All right. We'll come back to you. Lori, then we'll find out.
Just really thinking about the words today, and this is all very visual, and we are visual creatures, but our primary prayer is Shema Yisrael. And so how interesting that, this is visual. We love reading this. It's really fun, but our primary prayer is told to listen, which is kind of to sit back and get inside yourself and listen and think about what you need to do. And I think it goes with the link of, it's not assumed that the older son or child is the one to go forth. You have to listen. And so I'm struck by that.
Fantastic. That there's assumptions, cultural assumptions. For instance, the older son will inherit leadership that we are challenged to by all the time. That the Torah challenges all the time, and so that invitation to listening, to be present and not assume. I love it. All right, Carrie, was that a comment? It was. Okay.
And I think I might get us off the subject, so I apologize for that. But I was just thinking of the conception of the rabbi, or the versus this fancy person, to as Jewish thought, and we were dispersed. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. The rabbi became not so fancy, but learned.
Right.
And probably without those vestments, because where we were all over the world, we probably weren't in that state to have them. But that must have been a great responsibility for the evolution of Jewish thought, that then the rabbi became the person who thought and led us in thinking.
So I do not want to get into the variety of ways that rabbis are both regard themselves and were and are regarded, but I do think it is important to remind us that actually the intermediaries in Judaism now are rabbis, not priests, and that in fact rabbis might fulfill a mitzvah. Like if you're leading a service, you're fulfilling a mitzvah, but there's nothing except serving on a court that a rabbi can do that any Jew can't. So, and particularly like some Jews were excluded, right? Women were excluded. Sometimes people with disabilities were excluded, certainly slaves were excluded, and all of that has been written out of certainly in Reform and conservative tradition, that all Jews have access to fulfilling the mitzvot for each other, and to being intermediaries for God, for each other, and for them, and really for themselves, right? You don't need a rabbi to do a funeral. You don't need a rabbi to do a wedding. You don't need a rabbi to do a bris. You only need a rabbi to be on a court and convert you. That's where you do need a rabbi, or to divorce you. So, but other than that, Jews can fulfill these functions for each other, and that is quite empowering and democratizing. But kind of pulling back, I want us to have a moment to, never mind. I'm going to let it go. We're at 10:10. So let's see where this conversation goes, and we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes. Bruce.
I was going to wait for what brilliant thing you were about to say.
I've nixed it.
Right. So
Next year.
You talk about what the rabbi's roles on the priest roles and the Mishkan, and what Steve said about it being Sinai, this Mishkan that we moved. We have this vision that we moved this Mishkan all the way to Israel, and then we built a temple, and then we built another temple, and until that time we had only this one place where you could pray, and one place where you can make sacrifices, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, magically, that disappeared, and rabbis appeared, and we were able to be all over the diaspora. That's sort of our black and white vision, but it actually is not true, because archaeologists in Egypt have found that there were lots of mishkans and there were lots of temples built on the way, and it sort of throws that whole thing into the wind that maybe we learned that from Sinai, but the fact is that there were lots of temples built, or they weren't called temples, of course, but lots of mishkans, let's say, where people prayed and people made sacrifices, and it wasn't that we were just waiting for the first and second temple to be built, and that whole episode when we all of a sudden we decided we can build lots of temples in Newport Beach and anywhere else.
Fantastic. So David is giving us a language for that, a little temple, dashma'at, a little holy place. And in fact, there were many times in Jewish history where they were called temples. And the gift here that I like you calling out, Bruce, is this idea that the holiness traveled with Jews, and that is an idea that kind of gets expanded over the arc of Jewish history, not certainly the specific times, because in fact, worship was centralized at the temple, and that's why its destruction was such a loss, right? But in its destruction, in some ways we return to the big idea of the desert, that wherever Jews are, God is with them. And that was actually the big idea that emerged during the exile in Babylon, is that if the worship had been centralized at the temple, God was at the temple. And so instead of God being where the ark was, God was where the mountain was, right? God was at the place, and the place itself was sacred. And in some ways that was a regression into an idea of there is simply one place that was holy, that God in some ways was the God of simply the land of Israel. And so the Israelites worshiped one God, but there were multiple gods. This is our God, and our God's better than the other gods. And that is absolutely the theology you see in early Israel. And after the expulsion of the intellectual classes from Jerusalem in the first destruction, when they went to Babylonia and were in exile but kept together, and they still felt this connection to God. They felt this real loss, that they were no longer in their holy place, but believed that God was still the one God. And that's when you move from this idea of monolatry, worshiping one God, to monotheism. There is in fact only one God. So it was kind of an expansion of this idea of we carry God wherever we are. So, and yet, thank you, Steve, we have the idea of God in place that is still embedded in the language of the rabbis. Ha-makom means the place. God is the place. All righty. On that, we can do a whole session on the idea of God and place. We've kind of introduced here with this idea of a traveling God, of traveling sanctuaries and permanent sanctuaries, temples. Greg.
So the difference between rabbis and priests. I mean, priests it's a hereditary position, and you get to be there because you're born there. A rabbi maybe hereditary in some circles, but with a certain amount of study, anybody becomes a rabbi. It's something that's earned rather than it's just given to you because you were born there.
Yes. Yes. So in theory, right? In theory, anyone can be a rabbi. My parents have left, but my mother wanted to be a rabbi. And when she found out women couldn't be rabbis, she didn't ended up like, oh, well, I just guess there's no point in going to like a 4-year college then. So she's got her AA degree, but she was denied the opportunity to do what I do, which it took other people who were willing to challenge the assumptions that had been embedded in the culture. So the fact is that there is nothing in being a rabbi that says it is exclusive to men, but tradition, right? So tradition created a rabbinic class. And we see this both in the times of the early rabbis whose ideas have formed who we are, that they were group families that were higher class families and that clustered in areas of scholarship, that their children became rabbis. And then there was like the other Jews, and not all those Jews ascribed to their authority even at that time. And as the rabbinic tradition has been handed down to us, and that's of course that you may not know that in fact the tradition of ordination was considered broken and re-established, and some do not consider any rabbi today truly a rabbi. So there's a whole nother question, because there is this idea that it does need to be passed down, but it's not passed down by blood. It is passed down by the act that we will see Moses do for Aaron later, which is the laying on of hands. It says you are entering into service, and you get that when your teacher decides that you are knowledgeable enough. So that is a form of meritocracy that in reality, and in any meritocracy, including our own, in any place where merit is the form of access, it's not actually true, right? There are constructed cultural people who have more access and less access, but the idea in and of itself is powerful and something to aspire to, both in Judaism and in the US. And Ellen Cervantes, I think you might close it out for us, Ellen.
No, I just wanted to say it's simple. Isn't the definition of a rabbi a teacher?
Yes, so that is so interesting because we've all been taught that. We've all been taught that, but actually that is not what rabbi means. David Zarnow, will you please tell us what rabbi means?
My God. A rav, here's the way I've always defined it. Rav, the word in Hebrew, rav means abundance, a lot, but it doesn't mean everything. And so it's a person who is a clay kodesh, a holy vessel, who actually has the chokhmah lev by cultivation, the skills to bring out spirituality, to bring out God in other people. But it doesn't mean a rabbi knows everything. So I'll leave you with the definition.
That's a very nice definition.
It is a beautiful definition.
Very nice definition.
If you look in the early Mishnaic texts, Rav came to be a term that was applied to scholars and meant someone kind of exalted, someone with really respect and dignity, like someone you like. That's why it's often translated as sage, because we give that same kind of weight to that word.
Sages, and of course they all descended from Pharisaic Judaism, and I mean the rabbinic system did. And so they were always students. They were studied. They always would study, and they would go do.
It's very like that.
Yes, and Bruce, I like the parallel you're making. Reverend comes from kind of revere, right? There's a deep respect embedded in the term. I guess the way to leave us is, although the term rabbi, as we are taught, it means teacher, right? And that actually is a way that rabbis have come to interpret themselves, which is powerful. And that is what rabbis did. They had schools, and in the schools they taught. And so, yes, that was the role of the rabbi. My ordination and Rabbi Gersh's ordination says we are ordained as a Rav Umoreh, or in my case, Marah, the Yisrael, or by Yisrael, which is a big but different distinction. We are a rabbi and teacher in Israel. And so the ordination says specifically both that we are rabbi and teacher, and also that we are for all of Jews,
Rabbi?
not just ours. Yes.
Let me just add the word moreh or morah comes from the horot. And just as horim comes from the parents, so moreh is a purveyor of Torah, a teacher of Torah.
And if that is not an idea of widespread potential access to the divine, I don't know what is. Shabbat Shalom. It is always a real experience of enlightenment to study with all of you. It is a delight and delight. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Matthew, I meant to thank you and I didn't, so apologies there. Thank you for setting this up. I will, you will see me even if I won't see you at Seth's bar mitzvah later this afternoon.
Okay, sounds good. 1:30.
All right. Bye, Linda. Bye, Barbara. Take care.